Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Offspring, which is episode 16 of season 3 of Star Trek Next Generation. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek, so as determined by my Patreon user polls, and the episode to win my latest Patreon poll for this month was the Next Generation episode, The Offspring. So The Offspring is the episode where Data creates a daughter, a new android who chooses an identity as a human female, or the appearance of a human female, and her name is Lal. And an admiral from Starfleet comes and tries to remove her from Data's custody, which ensues a battle where Picard stands up for Data's rights. However, the whole point comes moot when Lal has a system overload and promptly dies, and she thanks Data for her life before doing so. So, this is one of my favorite episodes of Next Generation. I love this episode. Now, it's when, apparently in season 3 there was a fight, well, a disagreement, shall we say, between Michael Piller and Rick Berman on which episode they should showcase for the Emmys. Rick Berman wanted to showcase Yesterday's Enterprise, and Michael Piller wanted to showcase this episode, The Offspring. I think they ultimately did go with The Offspring. Now, I'd heard the opinion from another YouTuber who said that Michael Piller was completely and utterly wrong, that Yesterday's Enterprise is a far superior episode than this one in every way, shape, or form, and that Rick Berman was totally right. I disagree. I think they're both amazing episodes. They're both among my favorite Next Generation episodes. I think I like this one slightly better, if I'm being honest. But more to the point, I think clearly this was the better episode to showcase for the Emmys, because you want a powerful drama to showcase the Emmys, whereas Yesterday's Enterprise may be an amazing episode, but it's mainly amazing for Star Trek fans, people familiar with Star Trek in the show. If you're trying to appeal to a award show that is more open to drama, and you want an episode that's more relatable to anyone, not just Star Trek fans, then the clear choice was The Offspring, so I 100% side with Michael Piller on this one. Now, this episode is very comparable to The Measure of the Man. I think it is similar because it both deals with Picard fighting for Data's rights, and Data's rights kind of being trampled on by Starfleet. And in another somewhat controversial opinion of mine, I think this episode is better than The Measure of the Man. It's clearly the better one. In fact, I think The Measure of Man is a bit overrated. Now, I still think it's a good episode, but many people would put it in their top 10s. In fact, on IMDb, it's rated in the top 5 most popular episodes of The Next Generation. And I don't think it belongs there. For me, it doesn't crack the top 20. Maybe the top 30, definitely the top 40. But not the top 20, let alone a top 10 or a top 5. Because Measure of Man is a good episode, but it has flaws. It's in the second season. It has some of the cheesiness of the second season is rubbing off. Even though it's clearly the best episode of, I would say, the first 2 seasons, it still has that bad quality that is inherent to those seasons. And it has some silly points like, I don't quite buy the judge, what's her face, the character Picard was friends with, and what's his face, Maddox is a bit of a silly, over the top, evil character, and the fact that they made Riker has to be the other, attorney that's fighting against Data, that was pure television nonsense. So it's still a good episode, but it has its issues. Whereas I think this episode, The Offspring, does the same thing but better. It's more believable. I buy it more, and frankly, I like the Picard speech that he gives in this episode to defend Data better than the Measure of Man one. Plus, I kind of didn't buy that Starfleet would treat Data that way. It seemed, if they already allowed him in Starfleet Academy, the fact they would try to enslave him seemed really out of character for Starfleet, and I didn't buy it. But them trying to take Data's daughter away, I totally bought that. I totally bought that would be the case. So I just think it's a better episode, not only from the standpoint of defending Data's rights, but of course it's a really good character story. On top of that, seeing Data cope with trying to be a parent was a very powerful story. Now, it's funny because one of the script supervisors at the time this episode was being made, Melinda Snodgrass, was against this episode and didn't want it to be made and actually didn't like that it was made and said that it was too similar to The Measure of a Man and it was coming too soon after The Measure of the Man. And this Melinda Snodgrass just so happens to be the person who wrote The Measure of a Man, so I think she was a bit biased in that regard. But everyone else thinks of this episode a lot more positively. Jonathan Frakes stated that this was his favorite episode that he directed on the show, and he called this, in fact, he called the script the best sci-fi script ever written, which I think maybe he's overblowing it a little bit there. Michael Piller named this as one of his 3 favorite episodes of the show. Michael Dorn, who of course plays Worf, named this as one of his 2 favorite episodes of the show. And Mary Wiseman, who plays Tilly on Discovery, called this her favorite episode of Star Trek, period. So it's got a lot of love, and it is, granted, it is not, as the general fan base goes, is not as well loved as episodes like Yesterday's Enterprise, and as I said, The Measure of Man, which I think is ridiculous. I think this is clearly a better episode, but it's still well liked. It still ranks in the top 20 on IMDb, and I have seen it on some top 20 and top 10 lists. But is not as universally loved as classics like Yesterday's Enterprise or The Inner Light, which I think it should be personally, but it's still a really liked episode, so I think it is definitely a success. Now, so let me talk about the character of Law. I think this was a really good, as I said, character story. And in fact, the episodes focus more on Data being a parent and how Data's coping with being a parent. Which apparently, because this was the first script written by Rene Echevarria, I'm finally learning how to pronounce his name, he would come on to be a prominent script writer in Star Trek, particularly over on Deep Space Nine, and his original idea was to focus entirely on Law. In fact, his idea originally was more of a comedy and didn't seem as good, and they talked about how there was really a collaborative effort between all the writers to rewrite it, and I think they did an amazing job at it, but part of the thing that they changed apparently was to focus more on Data rather than Law. And I actually do think that was a wise decision because Data is the character we're familiar with. And I think this is an excellent character story for him. First, and the concept of Data procreating is a very interesting concept to begin with. Extremely fascinating and I think quite powerful. I mean, if my only regret is that this is they couldn't keep her around as a recurring character. I think that I think that would have been amazing, but unfortunately, the episodic nature of TNG won out in this regard. But still, I think it stands alone as amazing insight of how Data would cope with being a parent. And I love Data's kind of obtuseness to the implications of what he's done, which is really powerful in the scenes we get with Picard. And I think the interactions with Picard and Data are golden, because I think they're both right to act the way they do, because Data has kind of a nonchalant attitude about it. It's like, well, I just, I have a daughter. I've procreated. I have an offspring now, just like anyone else would. And he talks in terms about becoming a successful parent. But Picard is overwhelmed with the implications that this brings of having another soon-type android, which was seen as kind of being able to create one, which is a massive undertaking. And and he's just shocked that Data isn't taking this more seriously and didn't give him notice or whatever. And Data's like, well, I haven't observed other members of the crew coming to you when they're going to procreate. And I love, this is when we get one of the memes, and not the classic meme of Picard face palming, that was from Deja Q, but this is another one with the double face palm where he's on the table and he goes like, oh, which is a classic Picard moment. But again, I love these scenes because I think that they're both right. That Data is kind of correct to look at this as he's becoming a parent and treating it and wanting to be treated the way any other member would be treated by becoming a parent. And Picard's also correct that this isn't like any other person becoming a parent, that it does have wider implications, and that Starfleet is going to be involved and interested in this, which they clearly are. But I also love Picard's progression on this, because in the beginning of the show, he's talking to Troy, and he's like, I want to discourage this perception that, this new android is a child. She's not a child. She's, a new creation. But then Troy kind of convinces Picard and is like, well, why can't he look at it as, why does biology rather than technology need to determine whether or not this is someone's child? From his perspective, this is him procreating. This is his offspring. And then Picard's like, well, and then by the end of the episode, he's completely, you see this progression where he completely goes along from Data's perspective, where he's willing to stand up for Data's right as a parent and to treat him as a parent. And he risks his whole career over it, which I think is an absolutely well-earned and amazing character development. It's just so good. Now, as for Law herself, she's a very relatable character because, she's an android who's super intelligent, but it's kind of naive in the ways of social interactions, and she's very relatable to anyone with a disability or that inhibits, that's not very good at dealing socially with other people, the way that she's mocked by the other children. She's like, without understanding humor, I have somehow mastered it. And then the way that, she's super intelligent like an android, but really obtuse in some things where she thinks the flowers are painting, and Data has to kind of point out the differences. And then you get the scenes with her with Guinan, and Guinan's kind of teaching her the intricacies of human interaction. That was great use of Guinan. But overall, what I was really struck by when watching this episode is how much the Next Generation is great at having this really, like, the main cast and crew really being a tight-knit family that appreciates each other. And I just watched the original series, and I would say, like, that Next Generation did a better job at this than the original series did at creating this family of the main cast. And the Next Generation, and Roddenberry in particular, has been criticized in the past for, because there's a Roddenberry doctrines, and part of his doctrines that he refused to let writers to create, like, any tension between the main characters. That his insistence was, in the 24th century, everyone was happy, everyone got along with each other, and everyone was perfect, and they were happy, and everyone gets along, and they don't squabble and have arguments or fights over, or in minor things. And I've heard this criticized a lot from a writing perspective, because drama is based on conflict, and generally speaking, if everyone's happy and getting along with each other, then it's kind of boring. But, and so, as soon as Roddenberry passed, they kind of moved way more into the conflict side of things, such as with Deep Space Nine, and having the Maquis and Voyager and stuff like that. But I actually see how that, I understand the standpoint that you need to, drama is created out of conflict. So I do agree with that, the writer's perspective on that. But watching this episode in particular, I'm struck by how well it works. That you can make a really, still make interesting stories with everyone still appreciating and getting along and not having conflict. And how much better that works than relying too heavily on conflicts, such as a more modern show that happens to be airing at the moment that also features the character of Jean-Luc Picard, that relies way too heavily on conflict to the point where all the characters are nasty to each other and you don't identify with them, and it just creates a hostile environment, and it's just conflict for conflict's sake. Whereas here, you have moments like, for example, Data going to Dr. Crusher for her advice on how to be a good parent, and the way he's like, and it's just an amazing scene. It's an amazing interaction, and it showcased how much, these two characters who haven't interacted that much, but how much they appreciate each other and how much they help each other. And then Data is reinforcing Dr. Beverly, saying, "You're a great parent." She's like, "Oh, really? News to me." But he's right. And so he goes to her for advice, and she eventually gives him some good advice and tells him that he needs to be there for Law to give her love and attention. And he's like, "Well, I can give her attention, but I'm incapable of giving her love." And then he leaves, and then Crusher says to herself, "Now, why do I find that so hard to believe?" It's a powerful scene. It's such a good scene, because she's right, because Data does show love in his own way, particularly to Law. And she can tell that already. And so this really illustrates to me the power that you can have. You can actually do a show and a story where the characters all get along and care about each other, and still make it powerful and interesting, without having to rely on the typical tropes of conflict. In fact, I would argue to pull that off well is better writing than using the very easy crutch of having characters like Raffi and Rios and Girardi who don't get along with each other. It's too easy of a crutch, and it can lead to very lazy writing, I will say. And yeah, so you do feel the love between Data and Law, even though Data technically thinks he can't express love, and feels like he has, says he has no emotion, but he does in his own way, and that's what I've always loved. The best portrayal of Data were like that. Now, let me move over to, because there is conflict in this episode, so let me address that. Because part of the Roddenberry Doctrine, because the way to get around the Roddenberry Doctrine to create conflict was to have the conflict coming from outside sources. Now, usually, there's an alien. That's the outside source. But sometimes it's someone else in Starfleet, usually an admiral, which is why it's kind of become a trope of the asshole admiral or the diplomat bureaucrat who comes in, and this was used in the original series a lot, but it's also used in Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager a lot as well. And so if the crew themselves get along really well, they have to have an outsider come in who doesn't understand the family, connection of the Enterprise crew, and so they have to come in and create conflict. In this case, this happens in the form of Admiral Haftel. Now, I think sometimes when Star Trek does the asshole admiral, it is a bit obtuse and a bit obviously there to create a plot device, and it is ridiculous that it became a bit of a trope. But as far as Haftel goes, I actually, for the most part, I do buy him. I don't think he is too obtuse or too much of an asshole admiral. I kind of buy his position. Now, as I said, I think I believe in him much more than I do in Maddox, that Starfleet would actually try to completely enslave Data and take away his rights entirely. Whereas Haftel is more of misguided. That he is coming from a perspective of a cybernetic expert who sees Law as a new android and one that needs to be... he does have her best intentions at heart. He doesn't want to experiment and do evil things or, whatever. That he wants to oversee the well-being of this android. He just personally believes that the best way to do that is within a scientific facility on a starbase, which I can definitely see that perspective. I can definitely see that as a huge would be a benefit rather than being on a random starship flying in space, which could get destroyed. And he even makes the argument it's like one lucky shot from the Romulans and we lost both our androids. We don't have any. And it seems like he appreciates it as a unique life form that needs to be protected. But the one aspect of him that I don't buy is that he's so insistent on separating Law from Data. That does seem to be there for plot convenience, because if he doesn't insist on separating them, then you don't have the conflict. You don't have the story, because Picard even himself said, if you want Data and Law to go to the starbase, I'm more than likely, willing to turn them over. That's all well and good. Therefore, if he agrees to that, then you got no conflict. So he has to not agree to that in order to create the conflict, but really, his reasoning seems really vague. He just throws out a line of saying, I think Data's presence there would retard her progress, which he doesn't back it. That doesn't make any sense. I don't understand why he has that position. I think, and he's talking about having respect for their sentience and respect for Data, so it doesn't make any sense that he would deny him. Now, I understand why he would want to remove her from the Enterprise. As I said, that's a good argument. But I think later he makes some argument that it's not safe to have Data and Law in the same place. But if they're on a safe starbase, then I don't see anything wrong with that. And that seems to be a safe place to keep both of them. So obviously it's just there because you don't have the tension, you don't have the conflict if he agrees to that. So that is the plot contrivance where this character is concerned. But other than that, other than that one point, I actually do buy him, and I buy his position. And, I do kind of buy that he misunderstands how androids work, because he does try to relate. In fact, I love how he comes off as more realistic, because he tries, when they're talking about in terms of being a parent, he even says to Picard, like, you're not a father, I am, so you don't even know what you're talking about. And he tells Data, he's like, there comes a time when, sadly, parent has to let the children go. But then Picard rightfully points out that is way too soon for that. So I do think it's possible he's just misunderstanding the perspective of this being androids. So overall, I say I buy him enough. As I said, definitely buy him more than I do with Maddox in that whole situation. So let me talk about that scene. The conflict between Haftel and Picard. God damn it. This is probably one of my favorite scenes of the entire show. I love mutiny stories, and even though this one never really went to fruition, this one, it really gets my blood pumping, and it really makes me appreciate Picard. It's one of the episodes where I think Picard is just such an awesome human being. So, and it's fun because Haftel comes there, and, he's lecturing Picard on how he should take the Law away. And he's like, I'm going to come to the Enterprise, and if I decide that, this isn't a good place for her, I'm taking her with me. And then he was being kind of a dick when they were at the, 10 forward, and he's like, get that android out of there, why you have her waiting tables? And Guinan tries to reason with her, and Picard's just like trying to introduce Guinan, and it's like, they're under good tutelage, and he's like, no, get her out of here, blah, blah, and he's just such a dick to him, and I buy that. But anyway, he is the whole time is saying we should take her away, and then finally when he says I decided to take her away, Picard's like, you know what, I thought you came here to form an opinion, not to justify one. Which is very, because there are a lot of bureaucrats and politicians who do that. They pretend to be open-minded, pretend to be evaluating the situation, but they already fucking made up their mind. They just want to justify it. And so I buy that aspect of his character, and I think that actually makes his character very interesting. And so when he orders Data, because Data, has this really heartfelt, in a Data way, of course, of saying, when Haftel tries to convince him that the best thing is to give up Law willingly, that it would be better for her, and Data's like, you asked me to do this, but I cannot. It goes against everything I've learned about being a good parent. And so he just finally resorts to saying, fine, I'm just going to have to order you to take Law to my ship. And Data gets up to do it, and Picard says, belay that order. It's such an amazing moment, and Haftel tries to be like, well, you have no authority to stop me. Data, go, you heard your orders, go get her. And then Picard again is like, no, belay that order. You're not going anywhere. Hold your ground, Mr. Data. I love that. And Haftel's response is to say, threaten Picard and be like, you are threatening your career under some very shaky ground. And he's like, again, this is the amazing Picard speech. I think I even had this as my favorite Picard speech, where he says, Now, I don't have the quote verbatim for me, so I'm going to paraphrase here. But he's basically, he says there are times when one must risk their career under certain principles to stand up for certain principles. You acknowledge their sentience, but you refuse to respect their freedoms and their individual rights. And he says, ordered a man to deliver his child to the state, not while I'm his captain. So amazing. Such a great, I think this is probably one of my favorite scenes in all of Star Trek. It's such an amazing Picard moment that he's just willing to throw it out there and stand up to his admiral and stand up what is right, risk his whole career, and openly defy him and saying, no, you are wrong and I will not let you do this. So powerful. But I don't think this scene is undermined at all by the fact it all becomes irrelevant anyway, because they then get the call from Troy that Lal is malfunctioning, and so Haftel and Data go there and help her. And I do buy that Haftel would do his best to save her life, because no matter their differences on where they think Lal should be located, as I said, he honestly does have her best interests at heart. He was just misguided on how he thinks that should be accomplished. So I do think it was an amazingly powerful scene when Haftel comes out after trying to help Lal and just tells Geordi and Troy and Wesley, who are waiting in the corridor, that there's nothing to be done, that she's going to die. And he talks about how Data's hands were moving faster than he could see to try to keep up with each breakdown, but he just couldn't do it. And talking about how Data was remarkable. I buy that, by the way, a lot more than Maddox saying that Data was remarkable. That seemed not earned as much, really. But this does seem incredibly earned. I do kind of wonder why Geordi wasn't in there with them, because why Geordi was waiting out in the corridor, because Geordi also has expertise, but it might be a too many cooks in the kitchen situation, which I could buy. And Haftel specializes in cybernetics, where Geordi his specialty is more ship's engines. So I can kind of buy that, but it did seem, at first I was like, why isn't Geordi in there with them? But okay. But then we get one of the most saddest tear-jerking scenes. No matter how many times I see this episode, it does bring me to tears every single time I watch it, because it's just such a great scene. It's such a powerful scene. The way Lal says, tells Data that he loves him, and he's like, I love you, Father, and he says, I cannot feel it for you, and she says, I will feel it for the both of us. And then even more powerful that is when she says, thank you for my life, and then dies. It's just an amazingly powerful scene, and it just shows how they could take these emotionless androids, which are seen as technology, and really humanize them and really get you to feel for them. It's just powerful storytelling. And more than that, like, anyone who's ever had a baby pass away, or a really young, like a baby or a toddler or a miscarriage, can really relate to this scene of having someone that they love in their lives taken away from them way too quickly. And they could imagine that, the baby's thoughts were of, thank you for my life, thank you for the brief time we spent together. And it just I'm almost coming to tears just talking about it. And that Lal isn't regretful or angry or sad, but she's thankful for the time she did get to have with Data. It's very powerful stuff, and I think it is one of the most emotional, most powerful moments of the entire show, and I'm just amazed at anyone who would call this episode mediocre. It's extremely powerful, and then you get the follow-up scene when Data announces to the crew that Law has died, and you can see everyone is notably upset and sad over this, and Picard says the crew is saddened by your loss, but Data, of course, being Data, is like, oh, I appreciate your sympathies, but it's not necessary because I transferred all her memories to me, so she survives. What was her survives in me, which is a very, logical computer way of looking at it, and it's something you wish human beings were capable of. That their lost ones will survive in their memories, but it's with emotions, it's not easy to fully believe that. But Data, being an emotionless machine, is able to believe that, and it just makes you kind of envious of him. And it's such a powerful ending where he just goes back to his station very nonchalant, like it's just another day, but you do know how much that had impacted his life, and especially if you transferred the feelings that Law felt, that he could feel them too. He could feel that the love that he felt for her and for him, and I think that's definitely implicated. I also have to mention the scene when Law is starting to break down. She goes to Troy, and she says, an admiral from Starfleet's coming to take me away, and saying I'm scared, and Troy can sense the emotions. Like, oh my god, you are feeling emotions, and she says, I feel it. And that's something me and my sister always used to quote to each other. I feel it. But yeah, this is just an amazing, amazing episode. Now, this was Jonathan Frakes' first time directing an episode. This is the first time they had an actor direct an episode of Star Trek, one of the main cast members. I mean, you had the movies, you had William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy direct, but this is the first time they had one of the actors direct an episode. And this would come on to be a common thing throughout Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. A lot of the cast members would end up directing episodes, but Jonathan Frakes, of course, always seen as the best cast member turned director, as he would go on to direct some of the Next Generation movies, such as First Contact and Insurrection, and is still directing Star Trek today with Discovery and Picard, and is seen as probably the most prominent Star Trek director. And as I stated earlier, he said this was his favorite episode that he directed. Now, it might be because it was his first, but I think it's also because it's such a powerful episode. And I think because this is the first time they had an actor direct it, they did write the script in a way that Riker would not be present for most of it, so Jonathan Frakes could focus on directing. And so they had made an excuse that he was off, like on some mission, visiting a starbase or some bullshit. And so he comes back. They have Riker come back in the middle of the episode to see to see Law attend forward, and thinks that she's just a random bartender, and Law, of course, was just shown this couple flirting with each other, so she picks Riker up and kisses him, and you have Data come in and be like, what are your intentions towards my daughter? And Riker's just like stunned, like, your daughter? Like, it's a funny scene. I don't know if that's exactly how Data would react, but it makes it a funny scene. It is a good scene. But pretty much, yeah, Riker is not in that episode. Now, another interesting tidbit that I just found out about this episode is the scene where Guinan is pointing out the couple flirting with each other and kissing. They had originally scripted the scene for Guinan to say when a man and a woman have feelings toward each other, but Whoopi Goldberg kind of refused to read it that way and said that that's too heteronormative and wanted to read it in more vague terms of when two people. And she's like, but that's because she felt that was more in line with what Star Trek stood for, which I freaking love. And of course, at this point in stage, Star Trek was still staying away from LGBT issues and avoiding it like the plague. In fact, they were even able to convince the director to have, Jonathan Frakes, of course, to have a same-sex couple that Law was watching make out. But apparently someone freaked out and called the producers in the studio, and the studio immediately shut it down because this was early 90s, maybe even 89 when they were filming it. It was at least early 90s, so they were still not willing to go that far, which is a shame, and I think it is against Star Trek, but it is interesting to know that Whoopi stood up for changing that line, which makes a difference. So that is something to appreciate. Anyway, my rating for The Offspring out of 10 is, of course, a 10, the best. An absolutely amazing, heartfelt episode, one of the most powerful emotional episodes in the Star Trek franchise because it was earned through an amazing character story, seeing Data learning to struggle to be a parent and the tragedy of losing his daughter too soon, combined with Picard willing to risk his whole career to stand up for Data's right to be a parent. It's just an extremely powerful episode. So that's it for my review of The Offspring. Thanks so much for watching it. Thank you so much for patrons for supporting my channel and participating in my Patreon-only polls. Very much appreciated. If you would like to support me on Patreon, would be very much appreciated. You can follow the link in the description below. Even $1 a month will get you early access and early releases of videos and other sorts of goodies like voting and polls like this one. So thanks so much for everyone for supporting my channel, leaving a like, and subscribing. Be sure to check out my channel as I cover many, many more Star Trek stuff, as well as many other shows such as Star Wars Rebels, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.